also
Hey,
airing from
Kim.
home.
Exactly. Quite predictably.
Yes, and speaking of airing from home, why don't we just get that out of the way right now? Next
Cool.
week's talk will actually be from our team, from Nearsoft, giving advice on how to manage life better while working from home, correct?
That is correct. But correction, Kim, it's not next week, it's this week.
That's right, Wednesday.
This week.
Yay,
Yes,
it's
this
today.
Wednesday.
Thank you.
Right.
Very good. Yeah,
Sure.
so this idea of settling into
Hmm.
this kind of new norm for the next couple weeks.
Exactly. Yeah.
We're sort of those working from home, one of those companies that has a lot of practice in it. So if that's something that you're interested in and how to better maneuver, talk to us, catch up, watch us on Wednesday.
Please,
So,
yeah, and also, Kim, before we continue, we got Ruben on the back. So, man, this is the recap show, which is not this one, or is it? Right, the little logo thing. Just if you
there we
can
go.
activate. There you go. You do your magic as usual, Ruben. You're great. You're God. You're God in this stream. So hey, I'm sorry, Kim. Please continue.
No problem. Thank you very much. So last week we got a chance to speak with Alex Bernardzik. He is the Director of Business Automation at Digital Exports. And the title of his talk was Embracing Failure as an Agent of Change. So there were a couple sort of things that I got out of that. I can list them now. I think the first thing he did was, when he opened the talk, was talk about the shift of the last 20 years, particularly with programming, but also has applications in other work areas. And that's the shift from going from like this big bang style to this more agile method. He also had a really great acronym for us on what it means to fail. And his idea of failure is this first attempt in learning. And he also suggested that we get out of the habit of, get into the habit of soliciting feedback. And then finally, getting out of the habit, right? Making the shift from a do more mentality to an actually of asking the question of what's next. And finally, he sort of touched bases on this new sort of programming method, for lack of a better word. And that's something that's called mob programming, which I think is sort of this extension of pair programming, which is kind of interesting. So we could talk about that as well. So why don't we first address quickly this idea of the big bang versus agile?
Absolutely, would love that, Kim. So, well, this is just for the record for those viewers out there who are watching. This particular recap show is kind of special because none of us, I mean, neither Kim nor I are engineers. So please bear with us because we're going to might be approaching this from a non-engineering standpoint. So, which we're going to be speaking this from the mere mortal standpoint, So the Big Bang versus Agile. Well, I don't know. I kind of I've gone through a number of methodologies, especially Agile, that can be applied, as far as I know, in other areas as well, not only programming. I've also done what's this called design thinking methodology, which is kind of Agile. So as it pertains to software development, which is what our guest was talking about, I mean that was our guest's expertise. I don't know, Kim. I think that I get this. In full disclosure, I'm still trying to get a good grasp.
A grip on it.
He meant a good grasp of what he meant by Big Bang versus Agile.
I think it was talking about previous, when it came to software and things, like there would be these whole, shifts, like where we would go and we would program for a year and a half, 2 years before releases and things like that, hoping and thinking that we were addressing everything to our clients' expectations, when maybe that might have not been the case. And so I think with the shift of this last kind of 20 years or so with the rise of Agile is this idea to kind of fail early. And from that failure that we can then adapt and correct course. And ultimately, it leads to this idea that a series of small corrections is ultimately a lot cheaper and more satisfactory for the users and the clientele in the long run. But we don't have to focus on that one too much. But for those of you who are interested or even understand it better than Carlos and I do, watch the show. I think what we can do as we pull in this idea is also this idea. I really loved his acronym of FAIL.
Yeah, the acronym.
The first attempt in learning, right? Because I think the shift here is this idea that many times failure has a very negative connotation to it, right? Yeah. And this idea of let's spin it. Let's actually shift that into something a lot more positive. That when we fail, we're actually attempting to learn. And I think what he kept repeating all throughout the show was this idea of immediate corrections, right? This idea of micro failures versus macro failures. And if we're able to be in tune with ourselves and with our teams and accept and not ignore these micro failures, it's going to help us really not get to the macro failures. And this need to really be correcting in a very timely manner.
Yeah, and I think it's also about the second point about the FAIL acronym, first attempt in learning. I think would be one of the things that I got from that is also that you or someone should also probably work not only in identifying or spotting a failure or accepting it as a failure, but also in exercising a little bit of what I would call humbleness, because a lot of people, I've seen a lot of people out there just, they have a hard time accepting the fact that they can even fail, right? So, and I think that's a big no-no. That's a big no-no when it comes, in order to produce a satisfactory outcome.
Right.
Be it software development or something else.
Right.
Okay.
And I think that's a nice segue into the third point, this idea of getting into the habit of soliciting feedback, tapping into that humility. But I think, in that said, we also need to tap into our empathy, compassion, those soft skills as well. I think his main idea here between this idea of soliciting feedback is that everybody's so busy. And so it would be our failure, for lack of a better word, to not solicit that feedback, right? We can't just wait and expect somebody to give us feedback. We have to become more active and actually asking for it. And I think once we do that, we can create this culture, create this environment where everybody sort of feels safe, right? In asking for and giving feedback, because I think giving feedback can perhaps especially negative feedback, right? Can be challenging for us to sort of get used to. And then this idea of this shift from a do more mentality to this what's next. And I think he tapped in here too with this idea of the sense of micromanaging, and this idea of people feeling, I think oppressed is probably too strong a word, but this idea of like always wanting to, squeeze every last drop out of the lemon or whatever it might be. And this idea of do more. And we can really do ourselves the favor of keeping up our energy levels and our excitement and forward thinking by asking rather, what else do I have to do to what's coming next? And I like that idea a lot.
Yeah, indeed, Kim. So I guess that we should probably start focusing what on the takeaways. What was your takeaway from this particular conversation with our guest, Alex Benardzik, Kim?
Well, I think
I can tell you mine.
Okay, cool. I think mine came from a quote of his that came out near the end, and he was introducing this idea of mob programming, and he set this up. I really don't know nothing about it, but if you haven't heard of mob programming, watch the show. I think it's worth the Google. But it's this idea where it's like group programming, basically, and I guess there's like a driver, a person who's actually doing the code, the navigator who's sort of like this, the passenger side. Passenger driver. I'm a really bad passenger side driver, by the way. My husband hates me. And then this idea of the mob, everyone else sort of chiming in. And then it's like this musical chair style where you like rotate. And what's really cool is he said several of the benefits from that type of activity is that it removes blame. Everyone's working together, and also removes ownership. So nobody can look at this and like, look what I did. But one of the quotes that came out from there, and this was my big takeaway, I think, was this idea of when we work together, there's no fear.
Right.
I like that a lot.
Yeah. Well, and I definitely on my end, what I can tell you is that the takeaway for me was that give me some very valuable keys to be able to learn how to empower myself and my team or our teams at Nearsoft to essentially build trust, between pretty much everyone. And I think that we get deep into the habit of soliciting feedback and accepting failure and be willing to learn. I mean, we're also it's going to be easier for everyone to build that collective trust that is needed, not only internally, but also eventually is going to permeate toward on the business side, which is what our guest talked about. So our clients are going to be able to perceive us as trustworthy individuals, teams, and companies, and that's a big takeaway also from my standpoint.
Certainly. All right. Well, I think that's it. Watch the show. Embracing Failure is an Agent of Change with Alex Bernardzik. And we'll see you on Wednesday as we tap into some ideas, tips, and ways to work from home better over the course of these next few weeks as we're all waiting out the storm.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Kim.
Thank you. See you Wednesday, Carlos.
Take care. Stay safe.